welcome to a cover story interview. We have with us Chandan Gowda, who's out with his book called Another India. It's a collection of essays on various facets of, he talks about personalities, he talks about traditions. In fact, to quote a line from the preface, which really tells us what the book is all about. The book, he says, is, he's looking at addressing contemporary concerns through a creative engagement with different traditions of moral thought. So that's pretty interesting, Chandan, and congratulations. If you can hold the book up for our readers and viewers, that would be nice. Do you have a copy of the book with you?
Here's the book. Here's the book. Thank you, Priya. Thank you for having me on the show. Thank you.
Good to have you on the show, and I want to congratulate you. I believe the first print is already sold, so well done and congrats on that one. And
thank you, Priya. Yes.
If you can just tell us a bit about what the book is about first, before we go through various chapters.
Yeah. So, Priya, that if you grew up in modern India, went through the education system and read the mainstream media, there's a lot of things that are around us culturally that we are simply not trained to see, to see them for what they are, to understand them for what they are. So there's a big split in our midst. So we're all growing up, we're all educated Indians, we mean well, we wish to do well. But here is this thing of not being able to understand many of the cultural currents all around us, which other gone to schools or not gone to the same sort of, had the same exposure, are actually completely literate and familiar with. So there's a split in the worlds of experience and understanding. And I was trying to, it's almost autobiographical in the sense, what is it that these things, where do we look for? How do we make sense of them and belong here better? That's the overall.
So it's the school life and what is found in textbooks is what you are trying to, interpret in your own way. You talk about certain figures. You talk about, for instance, Nehru. Why I'm picking on Nehru is because he's also very current in the political flavor of the season. You talk about repositioning. Yes. Why did you choose Nehru out of all the prime ministers? And what do you mean by repositioning Nehru?
Yeah. So that chapter, I have two very big writers in Kannada, Masti Venkatesh Iyengar and Kuvempu, who had an unusual view of Nehru.
What view?
They were actually, there's an unusual view of Nehru. They kept saying, here is Nehru, who is an atheist, who is a secular, who is scientific minded. But if you really look at him in the company of elder leaders in doing things, there is something deeply spiritual about him, possibly be, indifferent to the, to transcendental things, etc., which I thought was an interesting way in which Nehru was being read by two of the biggest writers in Kannada. I was trying to also get us to see how do, the popular, sort of public culture, how do people read personalities, etc. This is another question of mine. But Nehru, as you know, as the first prime minister of the country who tried to lay a certain foundation for how the nation had to be shaped, etc.
So you're trying
in recent years, and I think.
Yeah. So basically, what you're trying to say is, it's not that, whether he is religious, you can be secular, spiritual and not religious, not traditional, but you can go meet people from all kinds, all different faiths. That's what how you saw Nehru. And which is
absolutely. And Lohia, who I also talk about, was an atheist, but he never thought, and he knew the Indian epics very well. He knew the Indian religious life very well. He constantly spoke about them, tried to evolve ideas out of them, etc. So I think it's a very complex.
Lohia and Ambedkar are personalities and thoughts that are being revisited today. For instance, the issue of caste is coming up a lot in politics also. And, we know Ambedkar viewed caste. There's also, the whole thing of relooking at Gandhi. So how do you see the way politicians use and discard various leaders from our past as suits their convenience? How is Gandhi being treated today, for instance?
Yeah, I think just even Gandhi is a very complex figure. He was changing all the time. His positions on big things kept changing, evolving. And very few people bother to even read him, but are very comfortable taking positions about him, very silly positions, and actually dangerous positions and irresponsible positions. And I wouldn't even want to engage that audience, except to ask them to be a little more serious when you try to engage some of the finest minds this country has produced. Priya, if you'll permit me to metaphor that quote you used, that when you're trying to engage with an opponent in a wrestling match, minimally the opponent wrestler should have loincloth, at least a loincloth wrapped around them. And if they come without it, wrestling becomes impossible. So all that I'm saying is, when we engage in debates, it has to have a commitment to seriousness. You need to have read the person carefully before offering a reading of them. And what we see mischaracterizations, just distortions.
So how are you seeing, how do you interpret Gandhi? You're saying he's someone who kept evolving, which is good, because that means you kept growing. He kept responding to situations as they were.
Yes.
So the reason why...
I find Gandhi...
Sorry.
Yeah. So how do I see Gandhi? I find him interesting for many, many reasons. One, of course, is his absolute insistence on non-violence as a means of, achieving what you want to achieve is very, very important. Not about, violence on the streets or just violent, physical means. It's about, how do you think? How do you think in non-violent ways? Don't do, symbolic sorts of violence, etc. Anyway, but Priya, he had the healthiest approach to the question of tradition, in my view. And he kept saying, I'm a traditionalist, but felt free to drop any aspect of tradition that seemed difficult to defend in contemporary times. And so there was a very self-correcting himself all along. On the question of caste, you see him changing so much. Towards the end of his life, he says, caste must go. We don't need it anymore. So, and intercaste marriages were the only ones he went to. He never went to marriages happening between members of the same caste. So he's changing. So we need to see that Gandhi too. We can't go to the early Gandhi and say the guy was, terrible on the question of caste.
So what do you think of the politics of caste that is being again revived, this Mandal 2.0 that is happening with this whole Jati census and all that? Is that, any relevant on ground, or is it just politicians trying to build vote banks?
I think the politicians are doing it with electoral gain in mind, no question. But the OBC question is an important question, and outside of any why the caste census may help one party or not help another party, the idea of a caste census is an important one because we really lack clarity. See, many of the backward castes may have actually become forward, and some of the forward castes may actually not be all that forward. So the caste sense for where these castes are on the education and economic and on the political capital, on cultural grounds, etc. So I think it's a good thing to have, because the last time we had a full caste census was almost 100 years ago, 1931. And it's amazing how it's just being seen as a question of gain for this party and a question of loss for that party. It must be seen for what it is, a very valuable exercise that will give us, update our sense of how the caste world is structured in modern day India.
So you also talk about Lohia and Jayaprakash Narayan. Why them, and what are your thoughts? What have you written about them?
Yeah, Lohia and Jayaprakash Narayan have written a lot. Their collected works run into several volumes and are inaccessible. I'm actually right now helping put together a reader of Lohia's writings with two other, Yogendra Yadav and Rajaram Tolpade, a political scientist in Bangalore, because they truly represent a very serious effort at trying to be creative in the realm of political thinking. Lohia starts off as the Marxist and then evolves a different sort of thinking on the question of how do we be democratic in a country like this? Language becomes important. Caste equality is important. Gender equality is very important. And having decentralized polity is very, very important for Lohia. He kept, so there are all these new concerns they brought in. Similarly, Jayaprakash Narayan, his idea of total revolution, is not at all like the revolution that we have seen, the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution, that have this model of seizing state power and then redesigning society from above. And that is not what they have. So anyway, the idea is that these two people represent very fertile sort of political minds, and they've done a lot. And we don't even have a cursory understanding of what they stood for. And Priya, I'm saying, even if you did an MA in political science, there is no guarantee you will read anything by these figures. Because if so, the canon of political thought is, what people read has been decided longer, and some of these things need to change. And I feel because they're thinking about questions that we all care about, and we should know what they've thought on these questions.
Okay, you also talk about festivals, and Christmas is one you talk about. It's not just Christmas; it's the idea that one, which is the running theme of the book, is know everything. Get to know what other cultures, what other religions, what other faiths are doing. Whether
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Yeah. So expand that thought here.
Yeah. No, Priya. That is myself not having I didn't go, I was not born in a Christian household, but the idea of Christmas and the Christ and the stories around Christ enveloped me all through my life. And I took an active interest, in this festival, not out of, okay, let me know more about it. No, I just felt, I had to be part of this festival. I felt drawn to it. And I was only trying to say that in a country like India, where we're all living amidst so many religions, a lot of people experience other religions this way. It is, and we need to know that, in the sense that the neighbors can be from different faiths, and there's constant, you're taking part in these things. And that's if you think about it, Priya, the liberal expectation is that we all respect religions and we tolerate religions. I think they're both important things to do, but I think we also need to celebrate religions and see how we can be part of other people's religious lives, get a better sense for how they are. It's not about you can do what you want, I'll respect you from a distance. You actually try to get into those worlds, and you emerge richer experientially, and the gesture you show towards other communities, this is what builds society, Priya. And I think.
Tell us a bit about yourself, Chandan. This is not your first book, right? You've written other books.
Yes, this is not my first book. My first book was a book of translation. I translated a novella by Yuvar Ananthamurthy called Bara, which means drought in Kannada. It was made into a film called Suka in Hindi, which you may have seen, by M.S. Satyu. Back in the early 80s. And this was shown in the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy in Mussoorie for IAS officers. Because the story is about an idealist IAS officer from JNU who is a district, and he can't quite understand how people around him are living in that dry area, and, etc. So it's again a modern Indian trying to come to terms with an India that he doesn't understand. I thought it was a great story. And I've done a reader of Gauri Lankesh's writings in English. I've edited it. Many joined in the translation work. I've done a reader of Shiv Vishwanathan's essays. I think one of the most brilliant social.
One of my favorites, yes.
Scientists. We've also done. Thank you. Yeah, and I've my own book, which was in the history of development thought in India. And how it came to matter so much for the Mysore state in the late 19th century and early 20th century. It should be coming out in a couple of months.
In fact, you talk about the Diwan of Mysore in your book. There's a chapter on him, which I found pretty interesting, because you take little anecdotes just to give a larger message. For instance, like he had 2 pens, one for personal, one for professional. He only took the job when he family assured him that I will not use this for personal favors. That's the kind, the ideal politician we don't see today also.
Absolutely. No. I mean, he stood for those anecdotes, whether they were real or not, actually show a certain kind of a desire on the part of the of Indians. This is how we would like to see things be done. So it's a critique actually of how things are actually done. So you're trying to through these figures, etc. So I was trying to get ourselves into these anecdotes, to the popular aspirations of ethical aspirations of people. Yes, Vishweshwaraya was a legendary Diwan. He was an engineer. You may have heard of him. He was the first person to get the Bharat Ratna, actually, after independence.
I didn't know
And
that.
he wrote the first book on planning. He was an engineer by training, but he did the first book of economic planning. I mean, it may not seem like a reliable book of planning, but he nevertheless did one in the mid 30s. Also, once in 1920.
Okay. So you also are looking, sorry, yeah, continue. There's also a lot of religious figures that you talk about, and you are trying to demystify them or put them in contemporary thought.
Yes. So I was trying to say that you have the mainstream religion, mainstream in the sense pan-India recognizable figures, Rama, Shiva, Krishna, and big figures like those. Even Allah, for example, can be seen as a pan-India figure. But then when you come down to local, there are Sufi saints, and there are village goddesses, village deities who matter enormously for local communities, and the relations between people and religion at local levels were done in local languages. It doesn't have the big paraphernalia of a large temple or these huge and the mythology behind those things. It's so incredibly rich. Rich as literature, rich as mythology. I mean, it's extraordinary. And this was just a way of revealing this. There's so much here, and these are living traditions, Priya. When they have fairs for some of these local gods, lakhs show up. And again, when I said, who takes an interest in these things? It clearly means a lot. So getting into the imaginative worlds of these, local communities and their religious practices, get your different sense of values, of how to be good. Religions will tell you how to be good. How
So
to
the
be good
India
question will find different answers.
Outside the textbook is really what you have brought out on the pages of your books.
No,
The
thank you,
diversity.
Priya. I think it's a nice way of putting it. Non-official religion. There's official religion and there's non-official religion, folk religion or popular religion, which is fascinating, and it's living. Unlike in so many advanced, quote unquote, developed countries of the West, these things are just matters of history, and they're not living. But these things are living in a robust sense, and this is what I was trying to. We should find getting into these worlds and emerging richer, and to be able to do things in a way that involves a wider set of people. Your aesthetics will change.
That is true. Well, Chandan, thank you so much for this conversation, and I wish you all the best for the book and
thank
for
you, Priya.
second edition. But we hope to have you back again on more conversations. But for now, thank you so much for talking to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priya. It was lovely.
Thank you.